האם זה באמת סגולה בדוקה? הסגולה ללמוד בזה?
Erev Tov and good evening, Dobro V'Yetcher. We are in the Zera Shimshon on Parsha Nitzavim. This coming Shabbos, God willing, of course, is a double Parsha of Nitzavim Vayelech. So we're going to take a look at section Aleph, Os Aleph, on Parsha Nitzavim. Before we do, let's take a quick look at the first pasuk in the Parsha. Here it comes. Atem Nitzavim Hayom, Ulchem Lifnei Hashem Elokeichem. You are standing, all of you today, before Hashem your God. Roshechem Shiftechem, the heads of your tribes, Zichnechem, your elders, Vishotrechem, and your officers, Kol Ish Yisrael, all of the men of Israel. And the next pasuk goes on to talk about the children and the women and the strangers and all of the other people being there as well in order to make a new covenant, a new bris with Hashem. So that's how our Parsha begins, and where Zera Shimshon is going to get right into what Rashi has to say on this pasuk, and that's going to take us in all kinds of very interested and I think unexpected directions. Let us get right into the piece. Os Aleph Parshas Nitzavim. Atem Nitzavim, you are standing. Perush Rashi explains, Lama nismacha parshas atem nitzavim laklolos. Why does the Torah, why does Hashem, in fact, why did Hashem choose to put our parsha of Nitzavim right adjacent to the klolos, to the curses that appear at the end of Parshas Kisavo? So in Kisavo, last week's parsha, we know that there were a list of blessings and brachos that Hashem said he would bestow upon the Jewish people if they kept the mitzvos, and then there were a long, frightening list of klolos, of curses that Hashem said, God forbid, could befall the Jewish people if they don't keep the commandments and they don't follow Hashem's mitzvos. So Rashi asks, why is Parshas Nitzavim put right after those curses? Answer, this is still Rashi. Lefi sheshamu Yisrael mea klolos chaser shtayim, because the Jewish people heard the 100 curses minus 2. So just even a poor math student like myself can figure out 100 minus 2 is 98. So the Jewish people heard the 98 curses that were articulated in Parshas Kisavo, last week's Parsha. Chutz mi mem teshe b'toras kohanim, besides for the 49 curses that are listed in Sefer Vayikra. The word Torah, the phrase Toras Kohanim is a rabbinic name for what we call Sefer Vayikra. And there in Parshas B'chukosai, there's an additional 49 klolos, 49 curses. So the Jewish people heard 49 curses in Parshas B'chukosai. Then they heard the 98 curses in Parshas Kisavo. Horiku Pneihem. So their faces paled when they heard the curses, the additional 98 in last week's Parsha. Ve'omru, and they said, Mi yuchal la'amod be'eleh. Who can possibly stand? Who can survive? And who can live and expect to live a life when there are all these terrible curses? Hizchil Moshe lefaisam. So Moshe began in this week's parsha to console them, to allay their fears. Atem nitzavim hayom. You are standing here today. Harbe hichastem lamakom. You did many things to anger Hashem, v'chule, etc. And the etc. is very important. Moshe said to the people, you and your parents, the Jewish people, you did many things to anger Hashem, and yet Hashem never wiped you out. Hashem never destroyed you or eliminated you. And therefore your fears can be put at rest to know that even though you're reading all these curses and you might be thinking to yourself, it's impossible for us to survive. God forbid were the Jewish people be wiped out because of our transgressions and all these curses. So Moshe said, Atem nitzavim, you're still here, and therefore you will still be here in the future too. So even though people sin, even though people transgress, even though it's true that curses can come into the world because of sins and transgressions. Nonetheless, just like you're here now, Moshe said to them, you'll still be here in the future, and you don't have to be worried about being, God forbid, being wiped out, having the Jewish people, God forbid, be destroyed. Next paragraph. Koshe tuva. Zera Shimshon says this is extremely difficult. Lama horiku penehem be'ela hatochechos. Why are we told that the people's faces blanched and became white when they heard these admonitions in Parshas Kisavo? V'lochein b'tochecho shel b'chukosai. And we are not told a similar thing regarding the curses, the calamities that are talked about and described in Parshas Bechukosai. V'halo gam bohem hoyadai v'hoser lehorakas panim. Also, with the curses in Bechukosai, there was sufficient and even more than enough to make people pale and blanch and be nervous and concerned. So that's the first question. Why is it that Rashi brings down a rabbinic source to say that when the people heard the klolos, the curses in Parshas Kisavo, again, last week's Parsha, their faces turned white and they became fearful? But we don't see a similar statement regarding the curses back in Parshas Bechukosai and Sefer Vayikra. We don't have a statement from Chazal that says the people were afraid and their faces paled and they became white because of the curses. So Rashi's first question is, why would that be the case? Why would it be that the people somehow were able to kind of take the curses in Parshas Bechukosai in stride without a severe reaction, without thinking, oh my goodness, we can't possibly survive this situation? They didn't have that reaction then, but they did have that reaction when they heard the curses in last week's Parsha Kisavo. Why? What's the difference? That's the first question in the Zera Shimshon. Ve'od, and another question, Lama Omar Mea Chlolos Choser Shtayim. Why did Rashi use the very unusual phrase, the 100 curses minus 2? Hoyolo Lomar, Rashi should have said, Tzadik Ches Klolos, 98 curses. Kimosha Omar, just like Rashi said, Chutz Mimem Tesha B'Torah's Kohanim. They heard the curses in Parshas Kisavo in addition to or besides for the 49. Rashi said the exact number, the 49 curses in the Sefer Vayikra, again in Parshas Bechukosai. Shaharei Meya Ein Khan, because 100 are not here. There aren't 100 curses in Parshas Kisavo. Viloma Nokat Meya. So why did Rashi talk about 100? So the question is a little more technical, a little more focused in the language of Rashi. Specifically, why did Rashi refer to the 98 curses in last week's Parsha as the 100 minus 2 curses, as opposed to just saying the number 98? Is there anything wrong with just saying 98 curses? Apparently not, because Rashi used the number 49 when he referred to the curses in Parshas Bechukosai. So there doesn't seem to be any problem with saying the exact number, as opposed to what Rashi did here and said in Parshas Kisavo, there are 100 less 2 curses, and left us to do the math. Why did he do that is Zera Shimshon's second question. And now in the next paragraph, we'll hear the third question. Ve'od, and another question. Ma terutz hu lomar. What answer is it to say, Atem nitzavim hayom? You are standing here today, meaning if the people were afraid, how did it help that Moshe said to them, don't be afraid. After all, you're standing here today. You survived until now, so you shouldn't be worried about the future. How is that Rashi's explanation? As Zera Shimshon continues, Ve'i mishum sheharbe hichisu lefonav. If it's because they did many things to anger Hashem, v'lo asa bohem kaloya, and he did not completely wipe them out. Halo ze eino teretz teirutz maspik. This is not a sufficient answer. Zera Shimshon is saying Rashi's answer doesn't seem to be a full-fledged, complete answer. Why? The dilma lo osa bohem kiloya, because perhaps Hashem did not completely wipe out the people, the nation of Israel, lefisha adayan lo avru babris, because they still had not violated the covenant that is put into place in our Parsha, Parshas Nitzavim. The events, all the events leading up to Parshas Nitzavim, meaning everything that happened in the Torah until now, we have to realize all preceded the special covenant that is formed and developed and sealed in our Parsha of Parshas Nitzavim. And maybe that's why they weren't destroyed. Lefisha adayin lo avru babris, because whatever they did before now, they still weren't violating the covenant in our that is articulated in our parsha of Nitzavim. V'lo hoyu adayin ele hatochachos ba'olam, and these curses that are mentioned previously in the Torah did not yet come into the world to take effect because the bris, the special covenant, hadn't yet been formulated, which again only took place in our parsha of Nitzavim. Aval mikan ve'elach, but here and onwards, meaning from Parshas Nitzavim and moving forward, in hachinami, we have to concede sheyesh lahem liyisrael lidog, that the Jewish people should be afraid. As a matter of fact, they should be very afraid. Mi yuchal lamos be'eleh, who is able to stand up once a covenant, a new covenant is made, and the Jewish people and Hashem have a new relationship that is dependent upon this new covenant, and therefore perhaps all the curses will take effect now, and God forbid Hashem might contemplate completely wiping out the people if they transgress the mitzvos, and if they bring upon themselves chas v'shalom the curses that are described in the Torah. So those are the Zera Shimshon's three questions, three strong, powerful questions, and of course the Zera Shimshon will now begin to bring sources, as is his wont, that he will weave together to answer these questions for us. So let us begin. Next paragraph, bottom of the column. V'yesh lomar, and we can say, the ikar horakas peneihem shel Yisrael, that the primary face paling, the blanching and the whitening of the faces of Bnei Yisrael, the primary cause of that was be'ela hatochachos hayasa. It was with these admonitions and warnings and curses and awe in the previous week's parsha of Kisavo. Why? Lefi, because, top of the next column, shekosuv kan, it is written here, meaning in Parshas Kisavo, gam kol choli v'chol maka asher lo kosuv v'chulei. Also, all of the sickness and all of the strikes, the blows, asher lo kosuv, that are not written about, will also befall you. So the Zera Shimshon says there is that line, that mysterious and kind of undefined line and verse in Parshas Kisavo that does not appear in Parshas Bichu Kosai. And that pasuk is very significant according to the Zera Shimshon, because it says, also in addition to all the curses that have been clearly articulated, there are all these sicknesses and blows and strikes that will come upon you that are not clearly articulated. V'gam elahem shtei klalos, and so these two things, the choli and the makkah, have to be considered as two additional undefined curses, choli umakkah, ela shelo nichtavu, but they were not written out, meaning it's true, the words choli and makkah appear in the Torah, but they are very broad, undefined words. Choli, sickness, makkah, a blow. The Torah is not saying specifically what will happen, what will be the specific punishment, what is the specific consequence. Torah doesn't say, it just says choli and makkah. But those two have to be considered as curses and added to the list of the 98 other curses. Ve'im kain, and if so, hey mea klolos, then there really are 100 curses. Ela shelo nichtavu ki'im tzadik ches. However, only 98 of them are clearly described and clearly written. Velama elu nichtavu ve'elu lo nichtavu. Why were these curses clearly written and these curses were only alluded to and not clearly described? Tzarich lomar, we have to say, she'oson she'nichtavu, those curses that were clearly written out. Yes, for example, cursed is the person who does X. Cursed is the person who does Y. Yes, kaimu hatochechos kipshuton vechich savan. The admonitions and the curses will be fulfilled exactly in the simple way they are written, in their simplicity and in their literally the way they are written. Aval osam shelo nichtavu, but curses that are not clearly described, like the two words choli and makkah, einon kol kach chamuros, they are not so serious. We can understand them perhaps less literally and understand them more figuratively. So the Zera Shimshon has of course now answered his original question number 2 about why did Rashi use the language of 100 minus 2 as opposed to just saying 98, and he just explained to us that really there are 100 curses, but only 98 of them are clearly written. And so Rashi used the language, and Rashi was copying the language of Chazal to refer to the curses in Parshas Kisavo, last week's Parsha, as 100 minus 2. 100 curses in totality, but only 98 of them are clearly described. And Zera Shimshon then went on to add, why is it that there even is a situation of to distinguish between curses that are clearly written and the other two that are not? And he answered and said, in order, because the curses that are clearly written, perhaps this was the intention of the Torah, perhaps was to say these you need to take literally, but these other two here, choli and makkah, the choli and makkah, you don't have to take those two literally. So that helps us understand why the Jewish people were so terrified about the curses in Parshas Kisavo, because it would seem that 98 of them had to be taken literally, and they could expect them, God forbid, to be carried out and executed against the Jewish people literally exactly the way they were written, as the Zera Shimshon will explain more clearly as we proceed. Next paragraph. Uminayan diyesh hefresh bein zeh lo zeh. And where do we know that there is a difference between things that are written clearly and things that are only alluded to but not necessarily written clearly? How do we know that the leeway, so to speak, exists for us to interpret certain things and certain curses in a way that is not literal, that is non-literal, and therefore perhaps more lenient and not as strict? How do we know that is even a possibility? Shahare Almasha Omar Yaakov. So here the Zera Shimshon is going to refer to the very well-known incident of Yaakov being told by his mother Rivka to dress up as if he were his brother Esav, and to come in and trick his father into giving him, Yaakov, the special brachos that the father Yitzchak intended to give to Esav. And Yaakov, when Rivka tells Yaakov this plan and tells him what she wants him to do, Yaakov says, "Vehevesi olai klolo velo bracha." If I do this, I will be bringing upon myself a curse and not a bracha. Yaakov said to his mother Rivka, you're telling me what to do in order to receive a blessing, a special bracha or blessings from my father. But if I do this, then I'm taking the chance, I'm taking a huge risk that he's going to curse me instead of blessing me, because he'll realize that I'm his son Yaakov and not his son Esav, and I'm only pretending to be Esav. So on that pasuk, Hikshu HaMeforshim, the commentators asked, Mahu vehevesi olai. What did Yaakov Avinu mean by saying, I will have brought upon myself? Hoyo lo lomar veyiten li klola. Yaakov should have said, if I do this and my father suspects me, then he will bring upon me a curse. Why did Yaakov say, I will have brought upon myself a curse? Certainly Yaakov Avinu had no intention of cursing himself or bringing upon himself a curse. Why didn't he say, my father Yitzchak will curse me, God forbid? Ve'od, and another question on that, on what Yaakov Avinu said, Lama kofal v'lo bracha. Why did he use the double language and say, I will have brought upon myself a curse and not a bracha, not a blessing? Dipshita, isn't it obvious, she'im yitain lo klola, that if Yitzchak were to curse Yaakov lo yitain lo bracha, he would certainly not be giving him a blessing. So it seems very unnecessary for Yaakov Avinu to have said, if I go in and deceive my father and he discovers that I'm not Esav, then he's going to curse me. I'm going to be bringing upon myself a curse and also not be getting a bracha. Of course, you're not going to be getting a bracha. The commentators asked, you're going to be cursed. There's no doubt that you're going to, if you get cursed, you're not going to receive the special blessings, right? So in that incident, the Zera Shimshon says we have two questions, and by understanding that incident, we can then go back and understand this whole idea of curses and how a written curse can be different than a curse that's only alluded to. Ela hatamhu, next paragraph. But the reason is, meaning the explanation of what happened with Yaakov Avinu in the episode with his father, and getting the bracha from his father instead of having the bracha go to his brother Esav, what really is going on over there is sheYaakov hayu misupak bahavonas hapasuk. Yaakov was doubtful. Yaakov was unsure about how to understand a pasuk in the list of curses in last week's Parsha of Kisavo that we've been talking about. Oror mashke iver. One of the curses, one of the psukim over there in last week's Parsha says, cursed is the person who is mashge iver, which literally means who deceives a blind man. Cursed is a person, cursed is one who deceives a blind man. And Yaakov Avinu was unsure how to understand that pasuk. Uperush Rashi explained on that pasuk, shenosein lachavero eitza, she'ena hogenes. What does it mean when it says cursed is a person who deceives a blind man? It shouldn't be taken literally that it's talking about deceiving a blind man. Rather, it means anyone who gives inappropriate advice to someone who needs advice. Someone needs guidance, someone needs advice, someone needs counsel, and they approach a person, and the person tells them inappropriate, inaccurate, or inappropriate information, inappropriate advice. That's what it's referring to. V'zeh ha'perush, in this explanation of Rashi, hu chutz mipshuto shel mikra. It is outside of the simple reading of the words in the pasuk. It is understanding the words in the pasuk in a non-literal way. V'nistapek Yaakov, and Yaakov was unsure, he was in doubt. Im zeh ha'oror shayich, perhaps this curse applies l'chol mi shemate adam iver osuma. It should, perhaps this pasuk actually applies to anyone who deceives a blind person or a sightless person. And if you do that, then you're going to get this curse. Yaakov thought that was a possible way to understand the pasuk. Kimosha hayitzarech hu la'asos. And that's exactly what he needed to do, lahatos es aviv, to deceive his father who was blind. So Yaakov Avinu here, when his mother told him the plan, Yaakov Avinu is thinking to himself, wait a minute, if I deceive my father who's a blind man, I could receive this curse that the Torah articulates, oror Mashke Iver Ora, cursed is the person who deceives a blind man. I could be bringing that curse upon myself by deceiving my father. Sheyi Asavor Shehu Esav, because my whole intent is to trick him into thinking that I'm Esav. V'lochein Omar, and that's why Yaakov said, Vehevesi alai klola, and I would be bringing a curse upon myself, klomar, meaning to say, Behata'azo, with this act of deceit, sha'ani oseh le'avi, that I am about to do to my father, next page, top of the column, on the right, Shehu Suma, he is a sightless individual. Ani misyore, I am afraid. Pen amshich alai haklola, maybe I will draw down upon myself the curse. Shel oror mashke iver, that is clearly written in the pasuk. Cursed is the person who deceives a blind man. Ve'oz afilu im yirtze avi laseisli habrachos, and then if I do that, and God forbid I do receive the curse, then even if my father wants to give me the brachos, enam yecholos lachul, they cannot possibly take effect. B'makom sheyesh kvar haklala v'ha'oror, in a situation in which I've brought down upon myself the klala and the oror, the curses that are clearly talked about in the pasuk. So the Zera Shimshon says, we need to understand in a much clearer way what Yaakov was talking about. Yaakov was not saying, as we usually think, if I go in there and try to trick my father and he discovers what I'm doing, he's going to curse me. That's not what Yaakov was saying. Yaakov was saying, if I go in and trick my father, then I am deceiving a blind man, and I might be bringing down upon myself the curse from the Torah that says, Oror mashke iver. And even though Rashi doesn't understand the pasuk that way, Yaakov Avinu was afraid that that's the way the pasuk could be understood. Next paragraph, Ve'imo omrolo. So Rivka said to Yaakov, Olai kililoscha b'ni, on me your curse will be, my son. Klomar, this is what she meant to say. Ha pasuk eno muvan kipshuto. That pasuk about deceiving a blind man is not to be understood in its literal sense. Ela kemoshe perish Rashi, but it should be understood the way Rashi explained it. Shenosein lachavero eitza she'ena hogenes, that it's referring to a person who gives an individual inappropriate advice and counsel. The im kain, and if so, if that's the correct way to understand the pasuk, and Rivka was asserting that it was, im hayusa eitza she'ena hogenes, if the advice Yaakov Avinu, if the advice that Rivka gave to Yaakov, her son, was incorrect advice, if she shouldn't have told him to go in and try and get the bracha from his father, she said, then the curse should come on me, because I'm the one giving you this advice. I'm the one telling you to do this plan. V'lo alecha, and not on you. You won't receive a curse for following my advice and my plan. However, adarabba, just the opposite. Rivka is said to Yaakov, Shema bikoli, listen to my voice, do what I'm telling you to do. Shebizchus ha-mitzvah, because in the merit of the mitzvah, shetishma ledivrei imcha, that you will listen to the words of your mother, tavo lecha ha-bracha, you will receive the bracha that you are seeking from Yitzchak, your father. So the Zera Shimshon puts an entirely new twist, an entirely new understanding on the dialogue between Yaakov Avinu and his mother Rivka about what was happening. And the core of their dialogue, the core of their discussion, centered on how to understand a pasuk in last week's parsha, Oror Mashke Iver. Should it be understood literally as Yaakov understood it, and therefore he was afraid of trying to deceive his father? Or should it be understood in a totally different sense in the way Rashi understands it, and it has to do with giving inappropriate counsel or advice, in which case Rivka said, that's not your problem, Yaakov, that will be my problem, because I'm the one giving you the guidance and advice to carry out this plan. Continuing in the next paragraph, V'hachanami, here also, meaning the Zera Shimshon has now has taken a kind of a divergent path. He's gone off on a tangent to explain the episode with Yaakov and his mother and that incident in Chumash, and now he's coming back. Here also in our discussion, Im nomar she'ein hadavorim kipshuton, if we say that the words should not be understood literally, the curses should not be taken literally, nuchol lomar, then we would be able to say sheyavo aleihem yisurim rabim, that it's true that the Jewish people might, God forbid, suffer many punishments. Aval bi'ahava, but the punishments will be through love. K'moshe miyaser ish espino, the way a man teaches and criticizes and gives musar to his son and even punishes his son, but in a loving way. O yiyu yusurim domim le'elu haksuvim, or perhaps punishments will come to the Jewish people that are similar to the things written in the Torah, avalo yiyu domim legamre, but they won't be exactly similar. They won't be taken literally. So the Zera Shimshon is saying the same way that Yaakov and his mother Rivka dialogued and debated and discussed how to understand the pasuk and whether or not it had to be taken literally, so too here when we're dealing with the curses in the Torah, do they have to be taken literally? Perhaps not. Perhaps bad punishments will come to the Jewish people, but we don't necessarily have to take the words of the curses exactly and precisely literally. As we find in a Gemara in the 9th chapter of Maseches Brachos, and here the Zera Shimshon is going to bring in a story, an absolutely amazing and fascinating story from a Gemara in Masechta Brachos, and I'll give you just a little background so you understand what's coming up. The Gemara tells us that there was an individual named Barhedia who could interpret dreams. And if you paid him to interpret your dreams, then he interpreted your dreams in a positive fashion. But if you did not pay him and you just said, Barhedia, interpret my dream, and you told him your dream, then he would interpret your dream in a negative way. And so that exact thing happened with the two great Talmudic sages, Abaya and Rava, as we're going to see right now. The Barhedia haya meforesh la Abaya. Barhedia explained to Abaya, Harbe psukim shel elu hatochechos letivusa. Many of the psukim that are in these curses in a good way, for positive results, meaning Abaya and Rava both had dreams in which they heard the psukim, the curses of from the Torah of Parshas Kisavo being read to them. They heard that in their dream. And when Abaya came and said to Barhedia, I heard a specific pasuk that sounds terrible, a curse, read to me in a dream, Barhedia interpreted it in a positive way. And when Rava told Barhedia that he heard the same pasuk, Barhedia interpreted it in a negative way. Gaon, for example, here is an example from that Gemara. Shorcha tavuch le'einecha. One of the curses says, your ox will be slaughtered in front of you, right in front of your eyes, and you will not eat from the meat. The way that's generally understood is that enemies will come and they'll go through the land and they'll take people's animals and they'll slaughter the animals and they will sit there and eat the meat from the animals, and the people, the Jews who own the animals, will be starving and suffering and not even able to get a little morsel from their slaughtered animals that the enemies have slaughtered. That's what the curse means literally. But here's what how Barhedia interpreted it to Abaya. Nefish iskach, your business will be so successful, v'tavchas, and you'll slaughter an animal, v'lo achlos v'shases, but you won't eat and drink from the big feast, meched v'sodelibech, because of the joy in your heart, You, Abaya, don't have to worry about anything bad happening, just the opposite. This pasuk that you heard read to you was foretelling the fact that you're going to be so successful in business and so happy and so overjoyed with your wealth and your prosperity that even when they take an animal and your family and they have a feast and they slaughter it for a celebration, you're not going to eat because you're going to be so happy and so full and satiated that you don't need to eat from that particular meal. That's a beautiful interpretation that Bar Hedya gave to Abaya. And even to Rava, who Bar Hedya interpreted his dreams in a negative way, lo mefarish le kipshute, he didn't necessarily explain them in a literal way. Elo amar le, but for example, in this regarding this pasuk that Rava dreamed about the ox, posed iskach, Bar Hedya said to him, your business is going to lose money. Velo ahanis loch lemechal meutzva delibech, and you will not get pleasure from eating from the sadness that's in your heart because your business failed. So even in Rava's case, Bar Hedya didn't give a literal interpretation that enemies were going to come and they were going to slaughter Rava's animals in front of him and not allow him to eat anything and eat the food in front of him, and he would be almost starving. He didn't say that. He just said, you're going to be so sad that your business fails that you won't get any pleasure from eating a meal. You'll have food to eat. You'll have meat to eat, but you won't enjoy it and you won't get any pleasure from it because of your financial situation. V'chein harbe kayotze bazeh, that Gemara, there are many more examples of this. So the Zera Shimshon says, you see clearly from that Gemara that we don't necessarily have to understand psukim when they talk about curses and calamities and terrible things. We don't necessarily have to understand them in a literal way. Next paragraph. Avol hoil sheyesh shtayim shelo kisavon, but in Parshas Kisavo, since there were two psukim, two words, I should say, that were not written out clearly. They weren't explained what they meant. That's the choli and the makkah. V'chol hasha'ar ksavan, and all of the other ones were written out in a clear way. Yesh makom lomar, there was a possibility of saying, a reasonable possibility to say, shezehu, that this, top of the next paragraph, simon muvhak, is a very clear an unmistakable sign, Shemasha Kosav, that what is written openly, Yiskaimu Hadivarim Kipshutan Mamish. It means Hashem wants to fulfill those curses, God forbid, exactly literally as they're written. Umishum Hachi Horiku Penehem Dafka Be'elu, and that's why their faces turned white, specifically with the curses in Parshas Kisavo, because of their understanding, because of their thought process about, two things were vague and 98 were clear. The vague ones we can perhaps understand figuratively and not so seriously, but the clear ones we're going to have to take literally, God forbid, and how can we survive that? The lo be'osan shel Torah's Kohanim, that did not apply to the ones in Sefer Vayikra because there were no vague psukim there, so they thought perhaps there, all of them can be somewhat interpreted in a lighter vein. Umishum hachi amru, and that's why they said mea klolos chaser shtayim. That's why Chazal referred to them as 100 less 2, because we needed to get the significance of the fact that there were 98 clearly written psukim, but actually 100 psukim when you add in the two undefined klolos, which has great significance in terms of how the people understood the curses in Parshas Kisavo and why they were so terrified specifically by the curses in Parshas Kisavo. Next paragraph. Hischil Moshe lefaison. So Moshe began to comfort them. Atem nitzavim ayom. You are standing here. V'chule, etc. Harbe hichastem. Many times you have made Hashem angry. Klomar. This means to say, Halo asisem es ha'egel. Jewish people, isn't it true that you made a golden calf? Uksiv be, and it's written regarding that kind of action. Zoveach lo Elohim yocharam. Someone who offers a sacrifice to an idol, to idols, to false gods, to false deities, yocharam will be destroyed. With all of this, with such a clear, seemingly clear pasuk, Hashem did not wipe you out, even though a golden calf was made. She'ein HaKodesh Baruch Hu manish es ha'adam, because Hashem does not necessarily punish a person kifshate dikra, like the simple literal meaning of a pasuk. Lefi shekvar nishba le'avos, Hashem had already sworn to the fathers, the forefathers, she'ein machalif zoram be'uma acheres, that God would never exchange his people, their children, for a different nation. Hashem had already promised that to the avos, and therefore there's shouldn't be a fear that, God forbid, Hashem would ever wipe out the Jewish people completely. Kemoshe Kosov Kan Rashi Zal beParsha Zo, as Rashi brings down on this week's parsha as well. Next paragraph. V'in hachinami, and we have to concede, shegam ela haklolos lo yiskaimu kipshuton. These psukim and the curses of Parshas Kisavo don't have to be understood literally. Shahare ba'pasuk, because in the pasuk gam kol choli v'chol maka, in that very pasuk of the vague description of the sickness and the striking, kosav yalem Hashem alecha ad hishamdach. It says Hashem will bring these sicknesses and poundings upon, then hitting, striking upon you until you are destroyed. Umizeh muchach, from this it is proves sha'af oson shelo nichtavu hein chamuros harbe. Obviously, even these vague curses are very serious. Shahara yesh bohen hashmada chas v'sholom, because it talks about the Jewish people being destroyed, God forbid. And this is the exact opposite of what they thought. That the vague ones were not so serious. But nevertheless, we are compelled to say, the words "until you are destroyed" eino dafka. They cannot be taken as specifically literally, and they are definitely not going to be fulfilled in their simple sense. Shahara Yisrael lo yikarsu, the Jewish people will never be completely cut off, meaning destroyed, mihiyos goy, from being a nation, la'olam, forever and ever. So the Zera Shimshon says, no matter how bad the curses are, we should never understand them to mean that, God forbid, Hashem is saying, if you do X or Y or Z, or X and Y and Z, and all of these different things, God forbid you'll be truly, completely destroyed and the Jewish people won't exist. That's impossible, and that is not how any of these psukim should be understood. V'zehu atem nitzavim hayom, kulchem lifnei Hashem Elokeichem. Zera Shimshon says, go back to the first pasuk in our parsha, and you'll see it doesn't just say you are standing here. It says you are standing here, all of you, in front of Hashem, your God. Why did it say in front of Hashem, your God? Klomar, this means to say, La'olam HaKadosh Baruch Hu hoyo v'yiyeh Elokeichem. God always was and always will be your God. Hashem always was and always will be your God. Umiklal zeh ata lamad, from this principle you can learn, shetiyu atem kayomim, that you will always exist as a people. Vehaklalos, and the curses, bein osan shenichtavu, whether they are written, bein osan shelo nichtavu, whether they are not written, lo yiskaimu mamish kipshuton shel dvarim, they will not be fulfilled, or at least we don't have to understand them as being fulfilled literally when they talk about the destruction, God forbid, of the Jewish people. Last paragraph, V'zehu she'amar hakasuv, and this is what the pasuk says later on in our Parsha of Nitzavim. V'hoya b'shamo es divrei ha'olah hazos. The Torah talks about a person who will hear about the new covenant and the curses that happen when someone does idol worship and other terrible, terrible sins. V'his barech biluvavo, and he will bless himself in his heart. V'chule, and he'll say, I'm going to be okay. The Torah talks about a person who says, I hear all of this new covenant, I hear about all of these curses, but he says, I'm fine, I'm going to be okay. Lo yoveh Hashem v'chule. So the pasuk says God will not want to forgive him. And then it says, Kol ha'olah haksuva b'sefer hazeh, and all of these curses that are written in this book will befall him. Shahakushos mivoaros. All of the questions on this pasuk are clear. Elakochu hakavona, but this is the way, this is the intention of that pasuk and what it means to say. Since we said that these curses, lo yiskaimu kipshutan, will not be fulfilled literally, pen yavo adam v'yomar, perhaps a person will come and say, lo yavo klal, the curses won't come at all. There are always people who are ready to take the teachings of Chazal and the teachings of our rabbis and the teachings of the Torah and misinterpret them for their own benefit. So maybe a person will come along and say, oh, don't take them literally. Oh, that means they're not going to happen at all. I'm not going to even take them seriously. They're just completely figurative, and there's no such thing as curses. They'll never happen. Rak sholom yiyeli. That's a quote from the pasuk. It'll be peaceful for me. I can do all these sins, and everything will be fine. Kipisron bar hedya labaya, like bar hedya interpreted the dreams of Abaya. Every dream, no matter how bad it sounded and seemed to Abaya, bar hedya gave it a positive interpretation. Umishum hachi mosif chet al peshan. Because of this man, this bad person, he will add sins to transgressions. He'll keep sinning and he'll keep transgressing because he'll keep telling himself, I have nothing to worry about. There are no punishments. There are no klolos. There are no curses. There are no consequences. Oz, then only in that case, not with regular people who are trying to do the right thing, but sometimes make mistakes. No, in that case, lo yova Hashem seloach, Hashem will not want to forgive him. V'chulei. Then Hashem will say, you know what, for you who misinterpreted everything intentionally, for you will receive the literal punishments. Midah keneged midah, measure for measure. V'zehu, and that's what the pasuk means, as kol haklola haksuva. He will receive all of the curses that are written. Dahainu haksuva mamish. He'll receive them exactly as they are written. Everyone else, all of the rest of Klal Yisrael, will be able to rest assured that Hashem will never destroy the Jewish people, but this person will have to be concerned because of his continued stubbornness and continued rebelliousness. He will, and thinking that there's no punishment at all that will ever come to him, he will have to fear the literal fulfillment of these punishments. The Zera Shimshon has explained so much to us and put so many different sources together that it's probably worthwhile to go back and see how everything fits together, but that's a little bit beyond our time frame right now. So Yasher Koch to everyone for joining us in the learning of the Zera Shimshon this week, and God willing, we'll be learning together in the Zera Shimshon next week.